All right, Alexander, let's talk about the European Union and Russian sanctions. Ursula gave a pretty amazing, I was going to say credible, amazing uh, speech at the WEF, where she said, very much like Olaf Scholz was saying in Germany, and continues to say, that Russia cut off the gas supplies to Europe, and that is why there are high prices, and that is why there's inflation. But she did admit, to her credit, she did admit that the EU economy is undergoing some challenges, and people in Europe have to deal with high prices and inflation because of Russian energy being blocked into the European Union. But she just decided to lie just a little bit and claim that it was Russia, Putin, that blocked the Russian energy to the EU, not that it was the EU sanctions, or that perhaps maybe a big pipeline was blown up by someone. Anyway, that was Ursula's admission. A little bit of truth, actually a lot of truth from Ursula.
Yeah.
Inflation, high prices, things are bad. But of course, the reason for all of these things has nothing to do with her policies, has nothing to do with the European Union. Putin woke up one morning and just decided, hey, I'm going to turn off the gas to Europe because that's the way Putin just is. You know, that's the way he makes decisions. Anyway, your thoughts?
It's incredible how these narratives are constructed. Now, bear in mind that throughout 2022 and much of 2023, Ursula and the European Commission were singing a completely different story, that, you know, they'd managed to end dependence on Russian gas and oil. Yes, there'd been some difficulties in adjustment, but overall, the process had been managed far more successfully, effectively than anybody had expected. And this is all because of the tremendous actions and concerted actions taken by European governments, organized and led by the European Commission and its leader, Ursula von der Leyen. I'm being slightly ironic there, but only slightly. That was the narrative in 2022, 2023. Now, about a year after Germany, where Olaf Scholz had to admit that actually things weren't that good after all, and that the energy prices, the cutting off of the Russian energy had been a problem. About a year after, Ursula is now coming round and saying the same thing. Actually, you know, it hasn't been quite such a big success after all. You know, we are actually suffering economically an awful lot of hardship, and it's had an impact on our competitiveness, and it's put strains on European businesses and European consumers, though this is all the price we must pay for liberty. And if you want to know who is to blame for all of the situation, it is Vladimir Putin, who decided to turn off the gas. It is quite extraordinary. I mean, Scholz said that a year before. Now Ursula is saying it. Now, as I understand it, what they're holding on to in trying to claim that this is not a lie is that back in 2022, Putin said, look, we're obviously prepared to continue to supply gas to you, but you must henceforth pay for this gas in rubles, because given the sanctions you imposed on our central bank and indeed on our banking system and the cut-offs of SWIFT and all of that kind of thing, we have no real choice but to take payment in rubles, because if we don't, you simply freeze the money that you are supposed to be paying us for our gas, which would be absurd. And Putin was absolutely right about that. And several European countries did indeed decide, as I remember, to pay for gas in rubles. But others didn't. Germany didn't, for example. And the result is that they're now trying to spin that into Putin switching off their gas. To say it straightforwardly, it is a lie. It is a straightforward lie. Suspending Nord Stream 2 had nothing to do with it. Blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines had nothing to do with it. imposing sanctions in the way that the EU did has nothing to do with it. It's all the fault of the man in the Kremlin. Here's the person who's to blame for everything. If your living standards are falling, if gas prices aren't increasing, and the reason Ursula is saying this, by the way, is because gas prices are increasing in Europe. If gas prices are increasing, it's not my fault. It's not Ursula von der Leyen's fault for insisting on sanctions on Russian energy. It's not Vladimir Zelensky's fault for cutting off the transit of Russian gas across Ukraine. Remember, we were being told just a few weeks ago how this was not going to have any effect at all on prices in Europe because the market had already factored this in. And we said that, stopping 5% of Europe's gas, which is what this would do, was inevitably going to have an effect on prices. Well, sure enough, it is. But anyway, don't blame Zelensky, especially given that Zelensky almost certainly did that on Ursula von der Leyen's orders. It's all Putin's fault and his alone and no one else's. And you should never, ever, ever dare suggest otherwise.
Yeah. And her solution to all of this, as you were listening to her speech at WEF, is more European Union. That's the solution.
Absolutely.
More centralization, more consolidation, more power into Brussels, and that's how they're going to overcome these price inflation difficulties. I believe it's called the Hegelian dialectic. I believe, right? You create the problem and then you provide the solution. Is that correct? I mean,
that's right.
That was what she said in the speech, though, effectively,
well, that's
right?
Absolutely,
More EU.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but let's put aside Hegel and the philosophies that he came up with in the early 19th century. Let's look at the absolute realities. Ever since the early 1990s, when the EU seriously embarked on a process of centralization, the result has been a steady decline in economic growth in Europe, a decline which then evolved into stagnation relative to other economies, and now has evolved into outright deindustrialization. And the response of the European Commission, of the Brussels bureaucracy, to every one of these problems that its drive for centralization and unification has created is to demand further centralization and more unification. And the result is that we are in a constant downward spiral because they always end up doing more of the same, which of course ends up making the situation worse. Instead of allowing countries to trade by themselves, do their own deals, buy their own oil and gas, run their own economies in their own ways, have their own currencies, which could then trade against each other and which would then correct any imbalances. Instead of doing that, they want to run everything themselves from the center, even as in the process, everything is being run into the ground.
Exactly right. 100%. One leader in Europe that would like to follow the model that you just presented is Viktor Orban.
Yeah.
He has been saying that he's going to possibly block the renewal of Russian sanctions. I believe the first part or one part of the sanctions packages are up for renewal in January, and then there's other parts which are up for renewal in March. But you need a unanimous vote in the European Union in order to get those sanctions, to continue those sanctions, to get those sanctions renewed. Of course, Orban now is looking at the statements that Trump has been making about Russia, Putin, sanctions. I'm going to impose terrible tariffs and sanctions on Russia. And the reports are specifically out of Politico that Orban may be rethinking his statement about blocking the renewal of Russian sanctions. Your thoughts on the sanctions, the renewal, Orban, and Orban's position actually now that perhaps he's seeing that Trump is not so much aligned with his view of how peace can be brought in Europe, especially with regards to Ukraine. I do believe we are seeing something like that, where Orban has a vision as to how to stabilize Europe, and Trump's vision, at least for now, in the first few days, appears to be very different.
I'm going to say straight away, I think Orban is going to be very, very troubled by many of the things that Trump has said over the last couple of days. And I would not be surprised if he's going to try and call Trump and try to tell Trump, look, for heaven's sake, rethink what you're saying, because it's only making things worse. And the direction you're taking is absolutely the wrong one. Now, what Orban is faced with a difficult situation. Now, if you remember, when we went to Hungary, the Hungarian officials that we spoke to, including in the energy ministry, said, look, we have no real choice but to take our gas from Russia. We are a landlocked country. We aren't able to access LNG the way countries with coasts can do. So for us to try and tear up all of those arrangements with pipeline gas from the Russians makes absolutely no sense and would put us into deep difficulties. And Slovakia, Fico, has been saying the same. And then what happened shortly after we left Hungary is that Vladimir Zelensky decided that he was going to terminate the contract, allowing Russian gas to transit over Ukraine. So the result is that the gas that was previously going to Hungary across Ukraine has been stopped. And that has also, of course, affected Slovakia and other Central European countries. So Orban is quite correctly saying that Ukraine had entered into long-term agreements with the European Union for energy security. Zelensky's decision to go against, just to block Russian gas deliveries, goes against those commitments for energy security that Ukraine had made. So the European Union, therefore, needs to get Ukraine to reverse this decision. And unless the European Union does that, Hungary will block sanctions. Now, that's a very, very ambitious play, especially coming at a time when Hungary, and even more so Slovakia, are under intense pressure. I mean, there's threats of a no confidence vote in the Slovakian parliament against Fico. The Slovak security services are warning of a possible color revolution attempt being prepared in Slovakia. The situation in Slovakia, in other words, is very, very tense. And as we saw when we went in Hungary, where we were in Hungary as well, there is now an opposition, an organized pro-EU opposition in Hungary. So I think that if Orban was confident that he had Trump's support, he would be emboldened to do what he is now threatening, in which case I think that the EU might start to put pressure on Zelensky to open up the pipelines. But without Trump's support, realistically, I don't think he can. I think Hungary and Slovakia are under so much pressure at the moment that they probably won't want to make their situation even more dangerous and even more difficult than it already is. Meanwhile, what they're doing is that they're talking to Erdogan and Vučić, who's also, by the way, facing color revolution threats. They're talking to Erdogan and Vučić about sending pipeline gas to Hungary and ultimately Slovakia through Turkstream. And Erdogan seems keen on the idea and says he wants to talk about it with Putin.
Yeah. Big color revolution, regime change operations targeting Fico and of course Orban.
Vučić.
And Vučić,
Orban, Vučić,
all of
absolutely.
them. The globalists, they don't give up.
Oh, no.
The EU globalists will not give up. They know that they have to get rid of Fico, they have to get rid of Orban. And, well, why not? Why not Vučić as well, I guess they're saying, right? They don't give
Exactly.
up. All right. We'll end the video there. The Duran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfit, and X. And go to the Duran shop, pick up some merch like what we are wearing in this video update. The link is in the description box down below. Take care.